And with that, that takes us to number 10 on our agenda, approval of the minutes of the February 26, 2024 board meeting. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan?
I'd make the motion to approve the minutes of the February 26, 2024 board meeting.
Do I have a second? Mr. Scully? Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0.
6-0, you weren't here?
No, you can still vote.
Okay.
Yep. Ms. Snipes also voted. All right, so that motion carried 7-0. Sorry for that chatter. That brings us to number 11 on public participation. And we do not have anyone signed up for public participation. So we will move right along to the action agenda. Number 12, action as necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan?
Make the motion that the board approves A, slated employment items shown in Exhibit A for action.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes seconded the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. And that moves us to number 13, first reading of the fiscal year 2025 capital projects funded through the 8% bond issuance. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan?
I'd like to make the motion that the board approve first reading of FY 2025 capital projects funded through 8% bond issuance shown in Exhibit D.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes seconded. And that will bring us to our discussion. Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, we're going to do a joint presentation. We'll have our Director of Operations, Dave Wiseman, and our interim Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Marty Ross, come forward and with their presentation. And we also have online from our financial advisor, Jay Glover, and here in the audience, we're honored to have our bond attorney from Burforma, Ms. Franny Hauser here. So thank you for being here.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Ross, members of the community. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes of your time to discuss the 2025 capital projects listing. I want to start out by reminding everyone that we've focused our capital projects on some more known data than we've ever had before with the MPS schedule. As we're looking at not only this particular project or this particular pot of money, we're looking at how to identify the priorities for each and every school, focusing on the ones which are the worst that need immediate attention and the twos as our primary two focus, as well as trying to maintain the current facilities that we have at this time. So we're looking at over 3 million square foot of property with right now about 11,000 plus identified item ones and twos that we want to address. We focused and we aligned our briefing along with the things that MPS has identified so that we try not to talk about several subjects that are all really classified as the same thing. So again, we're focusing on the health and safety and security, the building envelope, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, site conditions, and the interior. And again, what I tried to do is keep them all in the same order so we're not going back and forth. So we're going to focus or request a little over $2 million to focus on health, safety, and security. There's some specific items that are not identified in NPS that we do have to focus on. Specifically, the one that comes to my mind first off is the fire alarm at Dutch Fork Elementary. Regardless of the needs of that school, we need to make sure that we've got that system up and running over the next couple of years, and we need to address that, but it's not identified in NPS. So as you can see, we went through the process. We've identified those that were specifically related to the NPS identified needs, and then some of the things that we think we need to address immediately. Again, some ADA upgrades, and then of course some security upgrades across the board. We will always probably identify specific security needs and then non-specific with the board. Some of that stuff we will discuss either in the executive session as necessary, but we're always going to be focusing on a large portion of our needs to focus on the safety and security of the schools. Building envelope, If you look at the smaller of the two books over there, that is the what they call the RAMP report. It's the Roof Annual Maintenance Plan. We're trying to go back and see what we can do, what the plan was originally in identifying roof repairs, and what we really need to focus in on those particular schools, as well as what's under warranty and what we can capture with that information. So Al and I were flipping through it today, looking at some schools that we know we have some needs, but they're not necessarily identified in the RAMP report. One of the things that Alan has brought on is a team of folks to actually go and do some infrared studies of the roofs so we can identify or pinpoint specific needs to that particular school. And there's a couple of them that it seems like every time we rain, we have to go back up and address specific issues. So we're trying to make sure we address those across the board. There's some temporary or minor repairs on some masonry work with some of the window repairs and some work at CIS and Oak Point Elementary. The third part of this study is the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Although they did not go down into the sewer systems with cameras and stuff, based on some of the things that come across our desk and through our emails on a regular basis, we've identified some areas that we need to touch. Nursery roads being one of them. It seems like every time you get a heavy rain, it kind of backs up. So we're focusing on some of our capital projects, improvement projects on that. Looking at the middle school with LED lightings and some boiler replacements that, again, may not be identified in the MPS. We had one that went out this summer that we had to replace, and so we're going back and making sure that all our boilers are up to standard, and they're replaced preferably either during summer or during the break, so we're not interfering with the schools. And of course, we will always be addressing HVAC systems. Site improvement, those are just some general touch up on the schools, making sure we got the lines painted across the district with parking places and carve out our lines. Some erosion drainage issues at some of the schools listed there. Some sidewalk upgrades, and of course some playground equipment. Every year, the Department of Education sends out a safety team to kind of looks at our playground equipment, identifies some things that we need to replace, and we're in the process. We just finished 3 schools, I think, this past October, November time frame, and got those upgraded, but we always realize there's going to be an ongoing issue with certain playground equipment. So we just need to make sure that we have those identified and addressed. And of course, interiors, painting, flooring, there's not a really good identified rotation system with flooring and painting. We're trying to develop one, but we want to focus on what we think are the critical needs in certain schools. You look at Spring Hill, that school is 12 years old and the walls are beautiful, because I commend Dr. Lofton every time I tell him, because he really limits what can go on the walls, and he's done a great job maintaining that. So we're fortunate that we have a little latitude at that school, so we can focus on some of the more schools that we identified that need some touch-ups. Bathroom upgrades at the schools identified. We're just making sure that we have equipment in there that's not as breakable, I guess is the best way to say that, so we can make sure that they're secure and maintained for the schools, and then some general furnishing across the district. The technology port, Jenny's here behind me, just to talk about that, but I broke it down as to how we're going to do this. This is specifically why we're going to spend the $4 million. It kind of breaks it down into specific details. And again, we rounded those numbers up, probably just so it's easier math for me, and we don't have complete estimates on that, but those are pretty standard things that we're doing. One of the questions that the board asked last board meeting was specifically, what do we do with the surplus equipment? There's actually a plan where we either recycle it back to a company that gives us credit for that, or in some cases we distribute it down to the other schools that can use that particular equipment. The rest of it is just recycled materials pulled out, and again, we're able to get credit for those type of items. And the rest of the capital budget would be continuing to maintain our activity buses. The first activity bus I bought 25 years ago was about $63,000. Brand new, it was great, it had all the bells and whistles. Now they're about $163,000 because they have more bells and whistles on them than if you look at your cars. They've got lane assist, they got vibrating seats, they've got 360 mirrors. So they're going up in cost, but they are with safety features that we didn't have 25 years ago. They got fire suppression systems in there. So it's amazing what they've done with the school bus. And so, of course, I will always advocate for making sure we have the best equipment to transport our students across the state on activities. And then there's a contingency of $500,000 so we can address emergency issues across the district as they come up. This just breaks it down a little bit easier format. And again, the total amount is $15 million. I think you, pending any questions for me at this point.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Wiseman? Ms. Huddle?
The last time that we met, I had asked for a reconciliation from the McMillan, Pasden, and Smith report showing like what was on this plan versus what was on the bond referendum versus which wasn't. And I appreciate that you guys added the MPS listing on this report, but I guess my question is, are we going to be able to get that or not?
So we're going to go over the projects for the bond referendum today. So I think what we need to do is just let's compare that as we go through it. So it might be a better piece after discussion of 15 to see what was on there.
Okay. I mean, I'd just like to explain why I wanted that, and I went ahead and did some of it just for my own edification. So, for example, I just went through and I picked 5 elementary schools, and I just looked at their number ones. I didn't look at anything else. And Ballantyne Elementary has a number one of playground, but playground's not on here. Seven Oaks had a number one of water drainage, and water drainage is on here, but not for Seven Oaks. The Nursery Road had a number one for sewer issues, and it is on here, but it says a no. So, I'm just going to plead that I'm not comfortable voting for this when we spent all that money on that report. I'm just going to feel a lot more comfortable if we go back to that report and everything that was a 1 or a 2, we say what we're doing with it. Because my fear is we're going to vote for this and we're going to vote for a bond referendum, and then we're going to have 1s and 2s that got left out, and as a member of the board, I wasn't aware of it. Because the only other choice I have is to do that work myself. And I will if I have to, but I'm not sure I really want to.
I want to be fair to the staff. So when we look at that book there, the NPS report, I think, was submitted August 23. In August 23, we've identified $34 million of ones alone. With $11 million, we can't take care of all $34 million
Right.
at once.
I understand that we're not going to get, I guess I just want to make a known decision, right? And I want to be able to look people in the eye that know, just as that Ballantyne had playground equipment, and that we know, yes, we chose because we didn't have enough money and because maybe all ones aren't equal, that there was another one that was more important. That's all I'm saying, is I just want to make sure that we've had a conscious decision on what we're going to do with all those 1s and 2s.
And I'm going to let Alan speak for just a second.
So a lot of those, what you've seen in the report, some of it's the McMillan, Pasden, Smith report, and there's also information from our day-to-day operations within the district. So for example, the sewage issues that we have at Dutch Fork High happens frequently. We get calls. We're having to bring in plumbers on a continuous basis. Some of the other schools that might be listed as a 1 at another school, it's not apples to apples. So we're also looking at, from our end, the operational piece. How often are we having to send folks out there? How often are we having to bring contractors in to basically water jet these lines to break the blockage loose?
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not saying that there are not things that we know are more important than what they had. All I'm asking is, can we go back and clarify, what are we doing about their ones and twos?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is it? And if we've said we don't have money for it in either place, that's okay, because we've said there's something that is truly more important. Because, right, they don't live their life in our school district. They can't possibly know that this is an ongoing issue. They saw what they saw that day, that they happened to go there. So I'm not judging, I'm just saying I would like us to understand.
It's like you
as
want a
board.
master document that has an explanation of why you're choosing each item for this $15 million versus a bond referendum versus why it's not being done.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that makes
I
sense.
sent that, and it might not need to look exactly like that, but I sent an example of, here's the list of ones and twos, and here's a column. Is it in this $15 million? Is it in the bond referendum? Is it not in either, and why? Kind of thing, just so we understand. Because there could even be things in their list that you guys discovered weren't really an issue. Or maybe it got fixed elsewhere. Maybe it was a warranty issue. I don't know. I would just like to know that we've accounted for them all.
And some of the ones we can actually do in-house, and I'll just reference a playground piece of equipment. Basically, the rubber area got worn out over usage. So from the bottom of the slide to the rubber ground is more than, I want to say 12 inches or whatever the exact number is. So we can go back and just fill that part in-house and take care of some of that in-house. Although it's labeled a 1, as we go through, can we do that in-house? Can we, or do we keep having repeated calls out to a particular thing? But we'll try to give you some additional data.
That's not a bad idea, just to have a master document so that, like, as we go through the years and we're thinking back, like, why we made a decision, because you may not just remember everything because there's a lot in that report. So it's good. I mean, I'm sure that you probably have an internal document like that. But we get asked a lot by the public why we are or are not spending money in certain areas. So for transparency's sake, it might be good to have like a public master document that overviews why decisions are made. Because there's always a reason. There's always a reason why we decide to go one way or another.
And sometimes it's just to maintain the day-to-day operations. Like,
It's
a
tough.
sewer
Right.
I need to get fixed to get kids in the school. A playground, I can buy myself a little time by roping it off and having them play on another piece of equipment, but then get back to it in-house. So I'll try to come up with something that'll satisfy what you're looking for. It may not be every item, but I think you'll get the gist once we have a chance.
Madam Chair, if I may, I don't want to leave this table without making sure that we have an accomplishable goal. There's 11,000 items there. We are trying our best to knock through as many of these. If we look at the ones and twos are our priority, really, because really twos are turning into ones right now. So as we look at it, we have 3 different pots, and I think we can prioritize the ones, but that's about 137 items alone, somewhere in there. So out of that 137, it's going to be either 8% capital, general operations, or referendum. But we need to have some flexibility. At best, we have 11 million chasing a $34 million problem or $32 million problem. We have to look at this over time. So I don't want someone to say, I wasn't in this year's capital, you don't care about me. If we had 34 million of annual capital, we can knock them all out. But we've had identified needs from last year that have to roll over that we just didn't know about before the MPS. So there are 3 pots, and we just need multiple years to get through all 3. But I don't want the assumption that we're taking all 11,000 incidences and putting them on a scale. I want them to, be able to prioritize that. As we get out of the ones, that 137, I think it is fair to look at and say, of this, where's that on that particular timeline? A lot of it, though, we would like the flexibility of, there were things as technical as a doorknob or a light bulb, right? That we can handle that within our general operations maintenance. So a good point I just wanted to make clear what we were returning back as an assignment.
Mr. Satterfield, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want a little clarity on one thing. Dr. Ross, you said that some of these things had been from previous years, some of these requests. Is this a combination of principals' requests and MPS's recommendations?
So before the MPS report was even commissioned, we go through this capital every year from
Right.
what we see out of facilities and maintenance, what principals may request. So you have things that someone said, well, this didn't go through last year. For instance, I'll just take the activity bus. I'll pick on that. That might have been a holdover. So where we conceptualize 15 million, but we do our technology turnaround. So that's about 4. So that's really 11 a year. Then we have some holdovers of projects that weren't on the last year's capital that we have phased out over multi-year. So it just takes the capacity to go down. I don't see this as to take down that 34 million of projects. Then the other thing we have is we use very static numbers in a very changing environment. So the price in August of 23 was 34 million. When we go out to, actually place these, we sometimes see those prices increase, which further takes away our ability to get those ones off the books. So this is a multi-year solution, but I think the staff does need flexibility of 3 different pots of money over multi-years to address everything we have on the schedule.
Mr. Scully, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my question is more for the board. As in relation to that request for information, what would you, if we're going to ask them to do that kind of work and put together that kind of master document, what specifically would you have them not do and set aside in their day jobs to put together something like that? Because that's an overwhelming task, and Ms. Huddle didn't want to do it, and she doesn't have anything else to do. They have jobs that they've
Mr.
got
Scott.
to fulfill. So I think their internal processes kind of takes care of that.
Mr. Scully, I'll speak for myself in saying that I'm not minimizing the amount of work that takes, but I do understand that when and I've had this question, when we get into the conversation in a little bit about the projects, there are some questions that I have about those projects and whether or not they take away from these needs that were identified in the MPS report. And Dr. Ross and I have talked about that, and I still have questions. But a lot of it comes down to like being able to see, and he's like, well, no, we are going to address the walls at Nursery Road, but we're doing it with a different pot of money. Well, when we're talking about all of these projects, sometimes it's hard to keep it all straight. Like, okay, like where is that coming from? Like which pot? So I do understand, and they have to have they're the ones presenting the plan, so they've got to have something that they're using internally to determine where they're making the requests from. And it may not be necessarily like immediately transferable to the board because it's probably very in-depth. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do recognize the concern about making sure that we address the most urgent needs while understanding that the bond conversation that we're having may not be where the needs are being addressed. It may be in the $15 million pot of money, or it may be in the general fund. It's just hard to keep all of that straight as we go. Because there's a lot of moving parts always being presented to us. So I do think that it's helpful to have like a working document so that we can answer that question. And so while we talk about the number 15, and when I have questions about why isn't this on there, they already have thought about it. Because sometimes I look at it and I'm like, it seems like you're ignoring something. It's just an answer. I'm just saying there's got to be an answer.
They do have the answers, and they already have that information, and we shouldn't be the ones answering those questions anyway. That should come from them, and so any questions from the public like that, we should
Kevin,
refer
we
them.
approved the money.
I understand that, but having them do all that additional work just for us to answer some questions that they already have the answers to, to me, okay, ask them, let them, but are we not going to hold them accountable for in their regular jobs while they take their time to do this for us? That's all.
I got you. I do have a question. Oh,
Go ahead.
Okay, I do have a question about one of the items on this plan. And thank you for your patience, Mr. Wiseman.
No, I'm fine.
Mr. Knotts. I can't find it in my notebook, but I believe that you had on the last slide, there was money for the activity bus and for GPS and video cameras for district vehicles.
Yes, ma'am?
So I understand the activity bus. On district vehicles, are you talking, like, what vehicles are you talking about?
I will tell you right now, we actually have camera systems on every district vehicle, whether it's a maintenance vehicle, whether it's the one that student services use to transport their special needs kids, whether it's the mail courier video.
Okay,
I'm a component of, I need to know what's going on in the vehicle. If something happens, you'd be surprised what I can pull off of that and address the issue. And whether it's good or bad issues that I have to address, we would be, in my mind, malice in not having the protection of the district, of the students, and of the staff by not having those in there. Between GPS and cameras,
So if you
understanding
already-
what's out there is.
if you already have them in every vehicle, why do you need new ones?
I need to upgrade some of them. Some are close to 15 years old. Technology is gotten better. So I'm just going to upgrade the systems as we go through this process.
Okay, I was just curious what that was.
A lot of the systems ran off of 3G internet, and that has been phased out. So we have a lot of equipment that, we're not able to track.
Okay, so you're tracking where every district vehicle is?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was just like, well, because you can just put GPS on your phone, like if you needed to know where you're going, but I see what you mean. All right, sorry for that. Ms. Huddle?
I understand Mr. Scully's point. I just want to say it's not that time consuming. I mean, in 30 minutes, I went through 5 schools. But in understanding of his point, I'm going to make a motion, I move that we defer this vote on the capital projects until the board receives a worksheet showing the plans for the priority 1 and 2 items on the McMillan-Pasden-Smith report relative to the proposed bond referendum, the $15 million capital, the operating fund, or other resolution of those items.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. Ms. Huddle made a motion, Ms. Barnhart seconded the motion. Any discussion?
Can I explain it?
You can.
Okay, so this will resolve, and Dr. Ross won't have to wonder how the board feels about this. We'll vote on it. So that was the reason I made the motion. But also because I know you guys have done your job. I know that you know what we're doing, but I'm still not comfortable when we paid all that money for the McMillan-Pasden, and I go through it and I see these items, because like that playground equipment, it said $450,000. Now, I'm happy as a lark if we can do it for a lot less, but I'd like to see that, So that's the reason for the motion is so we can see it before we vote.
So I know Mr. Satterfield raised his hand. I'm going to say that I understand where you're coming from, but this is a first reading, so I believe that there's time before a final reading to defer a vote. But Mr. Satterfield, do you have?
Well, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. I think it's a viable discussion, I think. I know that you sent a copy to other board members on it, sort of a little breakdown on, how to look at it and see, not a prioritized list, but a list of showing what the project was and how much it was going to cost. And for simple people like me, it was pretty easy to follow. I'd also like to point out, I know this is probably a little difficult because we're asking for this bond and then we're looking at another bond referendum. And the projects there's so many projects to be addressed with MPS, and I understand that. And I know that it's difficult to determine which ones are prioritized. In the old days, they used to put all the principals in a room and we would hash it out, didn't we, Dr. Ross? And it was not a fun afternoon. You'd make a case for your school and your needs, and somebody else would do the same, and you'd walk out of there sometimes disappointed and sometimes not. But I think this discussion in of itself, now I guess one of the questions I have for Dr. Ross is, this will not deter the approval of the bond, the vote for the bond?
And we have, right after this, we're going to talk about the issuance of the bond. And there are some timelines associated with that. We do pick up some benefits from Muskego issuance. The question is, are we going to issue $15 million of debt this year? And if so, there are some constraints on time with that. I would say this, though, and again, I'm just kind of going back. MPS illuminated a problem that has always existed here. Just made us very aware of it. To think that in 1 year we're going to address all of it, and to as we prioritize it, we're knocking through this as best as we can. You're right. Every school is looking at us and saying, "Put the whole $15 million into my school." That's right. We have a big piece of toast and a little bit of jam. We're just trying to cover where we can take a bite. So I just wanted to say that I think it's not fair. While bond referendum is part of the option, we're talking about long-term debt. This is long-term debt contingent on a vote of the public. Category ones are things that we should be taking care of out of our 15 million, things that are guaranteed. I don't want to put too many of those in a potential bond referendum. So we could debate forever on which item one should be in this 15. I agree. But at the end of the day, we're not getting anything done. So I would caution of we can analyze things to the hilt, but at some point we're going to have to move forward. And I think we've addressed critical needs. We have articulated why we need these needs. And that's why we made this recommendation. So we stand for direction, but
Okay.
I just want to make that point.
Okay, just to clarify for the board, we actually have two motions on the table right now. We have Ms. Huddle's motion. Do we have any other discussion on that? Because I'm going to call for the vote. Mr. Scully?
Yeah, I know, first of all, I don't think that we should ever micromanage you guys. But in regards to Ms. Huddle's motion, I'm going to move to amend the motion to include everything she said and add that we authorize and pay overtime to the staff for every minute that they spend working on that motion.
Do I have a second for Mr. Scully? All right, Mr. Scully, your amendment has failed. So I'm going to call for a vote on Ms. Huddle's motion to defer this item. So, and there's still a motion on the floor that is the motion for first reading, to approve the first reading of this resolution. That's the original motion, okay? So I'm going to I'm calling for the vote for Ms. Huddle's motion to defer. So all in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? All opposed to Ms. Huddle's motion? That motion fails 4-3, and so we still have the original motion for the first reading of the bond and we're still not done. We're still discussing the first motion. So I just wanted to clarify for the board where we are, because there were several things that just happened. Ms. Barnhart.
Can we still ask questions about?
Yes, we are
we're
still
still okay.
on this item, because we still have to hear from Ms. Garris and from Ms. Marty Rawls.
Okay, I'll make
So
it
yes,
quick.
there's,
Just for clarification, do you have something like Ms. Hines and Ms. Huddle have been speaking about in any way?
So a lot of this information comes through our work order system, emails, phone calls, text messages. I know like a lot of times that with Dutch Fork, I get a text message from the principal saying, hey, we're having to cancel a basketball game because we have sewage backing up. So it's an accumulation of overall history in conjunction with input from MPS.
But nothing in the kind of style that they're speaking of in just a large document altogether?
No, we did not
Okay.
go back through that report and say, this school's getting this, this school's not going to get this. We did not do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Dr. Ross, Mr. Wiseman, you can continue your presentation.
Well, at this point, I'm going to turn it over. Did you want to speak? Did you have any
Hold
questions
on,
about
hold on.
the?
We have one more question.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Hogan has a question. I am so sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
no, thank you guys for bearing through this with us. I know that, when we got on the board, there was what was the report?
That was
MBCon report?
MBCon.
It was an
MBCon.
MBCon report, and there was a lot of conversation pertaining to what would ever happen with that report. And I understand that report got some length behind it, and some changes in the facilities occurred to where we commissioned a new report. Of the thousands of items that have been identified, whether it being 1 through 4 on the scale of importance, are we keeping track of what we are addressing and marking that list down to where if it's as simple as a doorstop was out of whack, we put it back in whack and everything's good? Are we checking that off the list where we can see that list is being addressed? And I understand where we're at with the ask today and the ask on the referendums, identifying a lot of the bigger items. But the ones that we can show the success of actually, completing the list, how are we on that?
So a lot of the data that was on the MBCon report, it wasn't as itemized as what we're seeing with the MPS report. So this information here is, so we have, basically a big database, a dump. That information, as things get completed, it go into the work order system because we want to track productivity. We also want to, keep records of what we're working on to make sure that we're not pumping too much money into a piece of equipment that, that we can just go ahead and replace. So that information does go into the work order system.
Okay. And
So the end goal is to have the data tracked through one system. The MPS is just basically the information we need to put into that system. It's kind of like a funnel. So we're tracking it down so we can see it on the day-to-day basis. What I just want to assure you, it's very hard to say my one is different than your one. There's not a 1A, there's not a 1B. It's a 1. We have to look at what we can reasonably fix at that time with this pot of money, while maintaining everything else that's going on. So although I appreciate and applaud the detail that we need to provide you, just understand it is a very difficult process of time to make a decision at a point as what is my priority for that particular school. I walk into a school and I feel unable to do everything I need to do in a school because $15 million is not a lot of money. Adding to the additional needs, and some of those things we have had identified in work order systems that MPS has addressed with us. The totality of that, $15 million is I'm throwing water on a forest fire. But it doesn't mean we can't keep every day, get up, do what we got to do to fix those problems. So I will make sure that we identify and address the ones that we need to as we can, because again, a water sewer backup or those kind of things does disrupt the school itself. And sometimes we are just reacting to, in a sense, a current crisis. So.
And one quick follow-up question, with the money that you guys had compartmentalized in the different sectors of where the money was going to be allocated, in the event that, let's say, technology, I think, is allocated at $4 million, if we did everything we needed under that and it was 3.5, does that 500 go towards another project where potentially there's an overage? And if so, does that come back to us, or is that at the discretion?
Anything over $50,000, we have to bring back to you. If we fix the thing and we estimated $100,000 and it was $95,000 or $950,000, we had $50,000. I think you'll notice that when I first got here, we tackled the 16 through 21 budget. Marty's bringing in her expertise to help me finish up making sure we identify those particular needs and address those. So yes, any of those items that we save money on, we're going to put it somewhere else, but it's going to go into operations in either technology or just the overall school operation. It will go back into the system, yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Unless you had questions for technology. So she's
Does
good.
anyone have any questions for Ms. Garris?
Okay.
All right, thank you, Ms.
Sounds good to
Garris.
Marty.
All right, Ms. Rawls.
All right, so we've seen the project, so now we need to talk about how we're going to pay for it. And you all have received a copy of the resolution for a not to exceed $15 million. And just want to go over some particulars related to the 8% bonds and how all that works. Public schools are allowed by constitutional limit to issue 8% of the total assessed value in our geographical district in general obligation bonds. And so we have used them in the past for short-term items. They can be longer-term, the debt can be. Another thing this is limited by is the millage rate. So we obviously have to be able to assess or levy taxes in order to be able to repay this debt on a short-term or long-term basis, however it's been issued. If you look at page 3 of the resolution, on letter B and letter F, it kind of gives the particulars related to what I was talking about. You'll see the actual number for the total assessed value in our district, what the 8% of that looks like, and where we are on that. There are multiple ways that short-term debt can be issued. You can do a bank loan. You would have investors that would, bank that would invest in your projects. Generally, that's a little bit higher rate than what we would pay. The district can issue bonds themselves, or what we have done the last year, and what my recommendation would be for this year would be to participate in the SCAGO program, where it's a pooled issuance. There'll be multiple districts that will go together and issue the debt, but it also saves us cost of issuance. It's a little bit less expensive for us to do it that way, so it saves the district money in doing that. The attraction for investors is a couple of different things. It's a pretty stable investment. It's not as risky. Public school districts are going to pay their debt. So for an investor, it's a sure thing. They're going to have income. The neat thing about a general obligation bond is it would be federal and state tax exempt. So that there again is another attraction for an investor. Does anybody have any questions or anything else I can provide regarding 8% debt?
Anyone have any questions? Doesn't look like it.
I do want Ms. Heiser to come up and talk with you all about the sinking fund. I think she can talk about it more intelligently than I can. So she'll be able to help you with that and any other questions you have on the resolution. Again, this is for 8% debt, not to exceed $15 million, which would cover the budget that Mr. Wiseman has provided.
Thank you, Marty. I'm glad to be with you all this evening, and I appreciate Marty leaving at least something for me to talk to you all about, because she did a really good job explaining about your 8% debt limit. The sinking fund issue comes from the amount of debt service being held by the county treasurer that is in effect a reserve fund, if you will, for your general obligation debt. So your county auditor is charged by law to levy enough millage to make your bond payments as they become due. And the auditor has discretion over how large an amount he or she is willing to have in the sinking fund or in your debt service reserve fund. Now, right now, this school district has probably more in its sinking fund or debt service reserve than other Lexington school districts. However, y'all have plans for both potentially a referendum and plans to meet needs that you can't meet in 1 year. And so, not to speak for your county treasurer, but his understanding, I think, was that y'all will be gradually drawing down amounts in your sinking fund. So we'll let Jay Glover talk to y'all in a minute about exactly what those numbers are. But we are confident that with the various needs that y'all have identified, and the potential for a referendum, that within 1 or 2 years, your sinking fund balance will be approximately the same as other school districts in the county.
Any questions for Ms. Heiser? Ms. Huddle?
Can we ask questions about the bond resolution now? Or
Well,
are
we're-
we
I think
just
we're-
talking sinking fund?
The 8%.
Oh, we're still just talking 8%?
We're still
not-
just
okay.
talking 8%, yes. Mr. Satterfield?
I'm going to boldly ask a question since Ms. Rawls said that she would like, no, Ms. Rawls, you don't have to stand up. No, ma'am. Since you boldly said, or you said that you'll let somebody else explain the sinking fund, the sinking fund is basically the money that the auditor or the treasurer is holding for repayment of that bond?
Yes,
Is that-
correct. So if I could give you a little bit of a history, back before the mid-1970s, school districts did not have an 8% debt limit. In fact, school districts had to have their bonds approved by local legislation. And so the big change in the mid-70s, is called New Article 10 of the Constitution, that's now about 50 years old, because I graduated from high school at about the same time it was being adopted. So the concept of a sinking fund is one that is a very old concept, and it is, in today's world, the best description of it would be a debt service reserve fund. Some people would say that sinking fund means the amount that you will need to pay your debt service. And so with that definition, it is not a reserve fund. It is the amount that will be necessary to make your debt service payments. There is language, however, that's been recognized by the Attorney General, and to the effect that a sinking fund really is an amount extra or an amount that the county treasurer can hold to make debt service payments up to 1 full year's debt service. And we've had a conversation with your county auditor, who's very cooperative and wants to walk the straight line and do absolutely just what the law requires him to do. But there is language that would allow y'all to have even a larger sinking fund than you have now. But that's not the current practice. Current practice is that you want to have enough of a sinking fund to be comfortable, but that you don't need a huge sinking fund because, as Marnie said, this debt is it's very stable, very secure, very unlikely that it will not be repaid. I don't know if that helped answer the question or even confused
No, you're helping me a
more.
lot. So as that revenue comes in, the treasurer holds on to that money.
That's correct.
And so that when our debt comes due, she has that available to pay our debt.
That is correct.
That is correct. That's all I need to know.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anything, Ms. Huddle?
Ms. Heiser, can you provide the Attorney General's opinion where they said we could have a larger sinking fund?
I'd have to, not tonight, no, I'm sorry,
Okay.
but I can.
Could you provide that to us, though,
Sure.
through email? Thanks.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Anything else?
And if it's not in the Attorney General's report, there are numbers of Attorney General's opinions, so it's either from old case law or an older Attorney General's opinion, but I'll be glad to find that and share it with y'all.
Do we have anything from Jay while he was on the? Okay.
All right, well, we have a motion on the floor, so I'm gonna, if Ms. Huddle?
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to make a point of order. I went back and looked, and last year, the bond, I'm looking at it, the motion for the bond issuance was on the discussion agenda first. And it was actually on the March 27th discussion agenda last year. We did not take a vote on it until we first had it on discussion. So I just wanted to make sure that we're following our own rules by voting on it tonight before we've had a discussion.
point of clarification, when we had it on the discussion agenda last meeting, is
We
that
had the
not?
capital projects, but we didn't have the bond issuance wasn't on, it was just the capital projects on the last agenda. This is the first time we've discussed the bond issuance.
And I think what the plan was is with the projects, that was the first part of the discussion, and this was just the financing part of the discussion, of the whole 8% projects, because we've discussed all the projects, and now this is the resolution that will help pay for it.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that last year, we discussed the bond issuance, and you can go back and look at the agenda for March 27th last year. It was on the discussion agenda, and that was the first time it showed up, and it didn't show up on the action agenda until the meeting after that. And normally on budget matters and things like that, we discuss first and then to vote. So I'm just asking, as a parliamentary procedure, point of order, is this correct to do it this way?
I believe it is correct. I mean, I'll stand by that. I believe it was correct. It was put on the last agenda with that intent. I will say I wasn't at the last meeting for obvious reasons, but that was the intent for it to be on the last, it was discussed at the last meeting, and that this would be on this agenda, and we've had this, the agenda was out, so, I mean, if we sent the agenda out before we even published it, so if that was an issue.
No, I understand. I just
Yep.
realized it tonight. I do have some questions, and we're going to take a vote. I have some questions that are not just on 8% money. So that's why I was asking, can we ask
Well,
questions
so this
about?
is about the 8%, or this is about this particular item. I know we're going to talk about the bond late, if that's what I want to make sure I'm not confusing what you're asking for.
Okay.
But this motion is about the first reading of the capital projects funded through the 8% bond issuance.
Okay, but it's issuing a bond for
So if this is
Yeah, I
what
have
you're
questions
talking about, then
this.
yes, then
Okay.
that's appropriate.
Okay. So first question is, what are the issuance costs? What it's going to cost us, legal fees, issuance costs? Because last year, and I hate to go back to that, but we got that before we voted, and I didn't see that anywhere in this package.
No, ma'am, we can provide that to you, but it will be very similar to last year. If I remember, when looking at Ms. Paul's numbers, it was approximately $69,000 worth of issuance costs last year, and it would be similar in nature this year.
Okay. I mean, I just think we should have that before we vote. The other question I have is, in the past, we have on occasion issued bonds at a premium. So for the lay people here, if we issue $15 million in bonds, we could issue them at a premium and actually raise, let's say, $17 million. And it works out kind of in the wash later on because you pay a lower interest rate. It kind of all nets out. But I just have I have a question. Are we planning to issue at a premium or just the $15 million?
And Marty, I could help address that as well if it's helpful.
The voice
All
from
right,
the
Jay,
sky.
We'll let you take that one.
Again, Jay Glover from PFM Financial Advisors, the district's financial advisor. You're right. In today's market, this type of debt instrument would price at a premium because the coupon is generally going to be higher than the yield. So in order to fund $15 million worth of projects, if that's what the desire is, we can lower the par amount to be something less than that to take into account just getting $15 million of proceeds for projects. I mean, we don't know exactly what that par amount would be because we don't know what the coupon and yield from the winning bidder would be. But if that is the district's desire, we can make sure that this is essentially what we call net funded, whereby we generate $15 million worth of project proceeds, and the actual par amount would be something around $14 million, kind of depending on the size of the premium.
Through the SCAGO program, we tend to not generate the amounts of premium that you might generate in a standalone bond transaction. In part because this is very short-term debt, and you tend to get a premium when you have longer-term debt. So, you know, I don't know that the premium really would play a major role in this process. You could do a standalone. You could set as a bidding parameter an interest rate and force a premium. But I don't know in today's market that that would be particularly helpful. So we're not seeing huge premiums anymore. Jay, I don't know what you're seeing.
The premiums are not going to be as large as they have historically because yields have gone up from their historic lows, but I think there would still be some premium. It's not to the tune of a couple of $1 million like it might have been, say, 2 years ago when, you know, this loan might have been at a 1%, you know, kind of all-in cost. We're probably more in about the 3% range now for all-in cost, maybe a little higher or lower depending on the bid. So the level of premium has definitely gone down. But I would likely think there would still be a smaller premium, but it's not as dramatic, I agree, as it has been historically in those ultra low rate environments we had, say, 2 years ago.
So we're looking at less than 2 million, in other words, less than 17 million
I would
total?
think so.
Okay, and also what interest rate are we looking at?
There's no way to tell. Excuse me. The SCAGO sale will be in very early May, so that it will close on May the 15th. And we have to have that scheduled because of other districts and their installment purchase revenue bond payments. There is no way to know what the interest rate will be for short-term rates in May. Jay mentioned like 3.5. I mean, that could well be. It certainly would, you know, Jay, I would ask if you've got the crystal ball on what you're seeing in short-term rates. And Jay, you might want to talk about the inverted yield curve and how it's actually more costly to borrow short-term than long-term, but that really doesn't apply to y'all too much today. So there's
no, I totally agree. You know, no crystal ball here for me, but I think if we were in the market today pricing this type of instrument, which is less than a year, you know, I would estimate around a 3% sort of all-in cost. So, you know, I think depending on rates move, you're probably, you know, 3 to 3.5%. I don't expect a dramatic increase in rates over the next several months. Again, I don't have the crystal ball, but I think the expectation is out there that the Federal Reserve is going to start cutting rates at some point, likely this summer. And I think you'll see pretty steady rates until, you know, that time. Again, obviously things can change. There's a lot going on in the world. You know, there's an election happening and whatnot. But I think just based on where we are today, you know, I would say 3 to 3.25 is probably a pretty good range of where we would expect a borrowing of what the credit quality of this issuance would be.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any more questions for Ms. Heiser or Ms. Rawls? Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor. It's a motion for the first reading of the fiscal year 2025 capital projects funded through 8% bond issuance. All in favor of the first reading? All opposed?
I'm abstaining, and I just want to note in the minutes that it's because I don't have the information on the cost of issuance.
Ms. Barnhart? Okay. So that motion carries with 5 votes yay and 2 abstentions.